Chapter 21 Exchange Rate Regimes. In July 1944, representatives of 44 countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire to design a new international monetary and exchange rate system. The system they adopted was based on fixed exchange rates, with all member countries other than the US fixing the price of their currency in terms of dollars. In 1973, a series of exchange rate crises brought an abrupt end to the system, an end to what is now called the Bretton Woods period. Which exchange rate to choose is one of the most debated issues in macroeconomics. This chapter discusses the issue of exchange rate regimes and the advantages and disadvantages of each regime. Learning objectives. Be familiar with the model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply for the open economy. Explain the short-run and medium-run effects of a devaluation on P, Y, the real exchange rate, and net exports. Explain what is meant by an overvaluation and explain under what circumstances a devaluation can eliminate an overvaluation. Learning objectives. Discuss the arguments for and against devaluations. Explain the volatility of the exchange rate under flexible exchange rates. Re-examine the effects of monetary policy on interest rates and exchange rates and understand the importance of expectations. Understand what role expectations play under fixed exchange rates and explain how exchange rate crises can occur. In the short run, an economy with fixed exchange rates loses the ability to use monetary policy and hence change in interest rate and exchange rate to influence output, since exchange rate is fixed and interest rate in the domestic country has to be equal to foreign interest rate. This would appear to make the flexible exchange rate regime preferable. However, in the medium run, economy reaches the same real exchange rate and the same level of output whether it operates under fixed or flexible exchange rates. For medium-run analysis, we use the aggregate demand, AD, and the aggregate supply, AS model. AD curve plots relation between aggregate price level and output. Equation 21.1 is the AD relation for an economy with fixed exchange rates. The real money supply, M over P, is replaced by the term for real exchange rate. Change in price level will affect output through a change in real exchange rate. An appreciation leads to a decrease in output and leads to the downward sloping AD curve. AS relation is the same as before, as shown by equation 21.2. Figure 21-1 shows the aggregate demand and aggregate supply in an open economy under fixed exchange rates. An increase in the price level leads to a real appreciation and a decrease in output. The aggregate demand curve is therefore downward sloping. An increase in output leads to an increase in the price level. The aggregate supply curve is therefore upward sloping. Equilibrium in the short run is at point A. Actual equilibrium output Y is below the natural level of output Yn. Figure 21-2 shows self-adjustment of the economy in the medium run under fixed exchange rates. Since actual output is less than potential output in the short run, actual price level will be lower than expected price level. This will cause expected price level to be lowered, causing the AS curve to shift down to AS prime. Actual price level will start to fall. As price level falls, it will cause the real exchange rate to fall and output to increase. Economy will move from point A to B along the AD curve till output reaches the natural level. However, this process may take a long time. Figure 21-3 shows the adjustment with a devaluation. If the currency is devalued by the right amount, aggregate demand will shift from AD to AD prime. Economy will move from point A to C and output will be equal to the natural level. The real exchange rate will be the same as it would be at B Because output is the same at points B and C and without changes in GOT, this implies that the real exchange rate must be the same. We see this from equation 21.1. The right-size devaluation that takes output to the natural level right away is harder to achieve in practice, and the J-curve reminds us that the effect of devaluation on output can decrease output before it leads to an expansion. A country with fixed exchange rates that has a huge trade deficit or is in a recession faces huge pressures to devalue the currency or give up the fixed exchange rate altogether. Keynes had argued for such a devaluation and against Churchill's decision to return the British pound to its pre-World War I parity with gold in 1925. Keynes was proven to be right. An overvalued pound hurt the British economy. However, those who are against devaluation say that too much eagerness to devalue a currency defeats the very purpose of having a fixed exchange rate and increases the likelihood of an exchange rate crisis. Equation 21.3 restates the interest parity condition. In words, it says the domestic interest rate must be equal to the foreign interest rate minus the expected appreciation of the domestic currency, or the domestic interest rate must be equal to the foreign interest rate plus the expected depreciation of the domestic currency. It shows that if a currency under a fixed exchange rate regime is overvalued and people expect its value to be lower in the future, then the domestic interest rate will need to be much higher in order to compensate people for that. In a regime of fixed exchange rate, since domestic interest rates must be equal to foreign interest rates, this cannot be done. In this case, the foreign bonds will become more attractive. People will sell domestic currency to buy foreign currency. The central bank may buy back domestic currency to keep the exchange rate fixed, but once it runs out of foreign exchange reserves to buy back domestic currency, the exchange rate will fall. So the expectation that the exchange rate will fall actually leads to a crash and hence a crisis. This is what happened during the 1992 EMS crisis in Western Europe. Figure 1 shows exchange rates of selected European countries relative to the Deutschmark from January 1992 to December 1993. In September 1992, the belief that a number of European countries were going to devalue led to a speculative attack on a number of currencies, with financial investors selling in anticipation of an oncoming devaluation. This then caused those currencies to depreciate, as you can see in the figure, relative to the Deutschmark. Equations 21.4 and 21.5 show that under the flexible exchange rate regime, the current exchange rate depends on the expected exchange rate n years from now and the current and expected domestic and foreign interest rates. Thus, changes in expectations can cause the current exchange rate to be volatile, that is, move frequently and perhaps by large amounts.